The Knights of Ren podcast is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., your source for Star Wars Destiny singles, sealed product, and more. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll. D20radio.com. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Knights of Ren podcast, episode 217. With me this week are Rick and Jay. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Doing all right.
Awesome. And we have a special guest, Christian from Severn Gaming Network. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, rock and roll. Lovely to be here with you.
Awesome. So, for those people who are listening, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, who you are, what you do with Destiny, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm Christian, also known as Peace Lord, and I run the Severn Gaming Network, which, a lot of you guys might know it from the sort of YouTube channel. Quite a lot of content up on there, and there's more going up all the time. But it really didn't start out as to be a YouTube channel and content for Destiny, actually. It started out just as a little group of us from church, just a group of friends who wanted to get together, play some more games, some tabletop, in general. And we just started inviting other people along, and the group, the network, just started sort of growing and growing. So initially, and still is, Severn Gaming Network is, my initial sort of vision for it was to be, a bunch of us locally just plugging into community, playing games and just having fun together. And what actually happened was I saw that Destiny was coming out, and I thought, okay, this looks good. I might do some content for this. Actually, as an aside, maybe you guys might sort of resonate with this. When I first saw Destiny, I've got to say I wasn't actually all that excited about it at first. I don't know if you guys saw I don't want to say ill-fated Gen Con demo, but I can remember watching that and being really quite underwhelmed by it. It'd be really interesting to see, because I know FFG had all sorts of excitement and things going on with basically no pre-orders for the game. I think of all the tens of thousands of people who watched that video. Team Covenant guys, Zach and Stephen, great guys. Something I think just didn't quite come through about maybe the initial excitement of that game. So it's really, really fascinating to see that, there was basically no pre-orders went into the game. You wonder how little things like that sort of could have affected it. But anyway, what then happened, of course, was a tabletop simulator. Tiny Grimes makes some great content. I got watching a bit of that, got quite excited about it, and thought, actually, this does look quite a bit better than I had originally thought. And so I just, when the stuff hit, of course, it all went mental. And I'm an instructor by trade. I love teaching. I love teaching new games and getting people into things. And so I thought I'll just do a couple of videos for this Destiny. And the next thing I know, after doing just a handful, I've got messages coming in from all over the world with people saying, "Oh, this is great! I love this. Can you do more of this?" So I just kept on going, making more videos, and that's kind of how Severn Gaming Network, in the sort of Star Wars Destiny context, sort of came to be known. The subscribers just kept going up and up and up, and it's sort of 1,200 or something like that now, and just really great. Loads of people plugging in and really enjoying it. So it's really funny how I'm here talking to you guys about this when it was just a bunch of us from church set up some, a tabletop gaming club basically, and then from there it's just grown. Really cool. I love how things like that grow. But I have a heart for community. I love to see people get together, plug in, play, have fun, all that kind of stuff. So that's how Destiny and Severn Gaming Network and all that came to all sort of, and me came to be all associated.
That is so cool. Everyone's got such a unique story when it comes to Destiny and creating, a channel or a podcast or, becoming a content creator. We kind of felt the same way when they released, the initial report of, hey, there's this card game with dice. I think all three of us were just kind of like, I don't know about this. And I thought the Gen Con demo was amazing. The biggest thing I actually wanted personally was to like get my hands on the dice because they were so much bigger than a regular D6. And seeing the gameplay was interesting enough. I figured FFG's probably got something unique on their hands, but rolling the dice, seeing how the game played out with the actions back and forth, I fell in love with it the instant I actually got my first game. And here we are now talking about it, every week and meeting amazing people. But the first question we always ask after the initial pitch is, where did you get your start in Star Wars? Everyone's got a story. Some people come from books, some people come from movies, some people come from TV shows. Where did you get your foot in the door with this just grandiose universe?
Yeah, for me, definitely the films. I can remember being very young. I think I was just 5, and I ended up going to like a double header of Empire Strikes Back and Jedi. I don't quite know how I managed that as a 5-year-old in the cinema, but there you go. But right from then, I can just remember being absolutely taken with it. Just these amazing images, of lightsabers and Vader and all these things that are just burned on our sort of collective memories now. And the sounds, the Falcon and TIE fighters and all this kind of stuff. So that was my intro, and I can remember being super excited about Star Wars kind of from then onwards, really. And friends and family, cousins and so on. I had cousins who had just about all the Star Wars toys you could think of. I always loved going around to their house, and we'd play it for hours with all the figures. And then, of course, as I got older, I discovered the tabletop and gaming and computer games. And of course, what's happened with Star Wars over the years is it's just grown. As a brand and as a thing, there's just so many ways to access Star Wars now. And so after that, I played the Star Wars TCG back in the day with the D6 rolling the dice, and you had the 3 different arenas, and oh my goodness, I loved that game. That was just it was fantastic. It just ticked all my boxes. It didn't last all that long in the long run, but there's just so many games and computer games and everything. And of course nowadays with FFG, who just don't seem to be making a bad game at the moment, which is painful for everyone's wallet, of course. But there's just the Star Wars stuff those guys are chucking out. It's just so great. And Destiny really has been, just a sort of, I don't know, if I needed anything else to make me feel more invested in the world of Star Wars and everything that it is, this is Destiny's done it. So yeah, I guess that's where I started, and here we are now, sort of thing.
So we gotta know, who's your favorite character in all of the Star Wars universe? Not just Destiny or just the movies, anything, anywhere.
Oh my goodness. Well, of course, there's so many to pick from. I think for me, it probably leans towards Jabba. There's something about Jabba, not only as a character in the films, and just how utterly alien he is, and everything about him, and the Hutts in general. But of course, early on, we didn't know all the sort of background and the fluff, if you like, around the Hutts. He seemed to be this sort of weird, isolated race character all by himself, and I just loved that. He seemed just so exotic and so weird and so alien, and of course so gribbly and disgusting and just horrible. And then of course as it all grew, and understanding that actually he's just this crime lord, he's this puppet master, and he's got all these people dancing for him, and he's just a big fat slug that sits on a plinth. There's and of course the way then that we see him put into games, and Destiny's a great example. A bit of top-down sort of design of, he doesn't do damage. He's not there to do damage. He's there to control and to make things happen, to get it done, to cause issues, all that kind of stuff. And, when we see that in how he is very often, Imperial Assault is another good example of how they've built him there to be this sort of control-y, puppet mastery type character. Love it. I'm a massive Vader fan as well. I'm all about Sith. I love the Sith and all that kind of lovely, cool, dark. Who doesn't like someone who chucks force lightning out of their hands and all that, there's been force chokes and all that kind of stuff. I love the Sith, but there's just something special about Jabba and I guess almost the world that he's a part of, and that world is a part of Star Wars as well. The sort of seedy, shady underbelly, if you like, of Star Wars. Love that.
One thing I always found amusing about Jabba and Hutts in general in the Star Wars universe that I think sort of came after people thought about him was this idea that, like, you look at Jabba in the card game, he has like 11 health, and you're like, he's just a big fat slug who's like an easy target. Like, how is he so tough? And, you know, you wonder, like, how did the Hutts even, you know, get money and then get people to do stuff for them and so on. But apparently, as part of their lore that I've researched, amusingly, Hutts are blaster resistant, which I find really hilarious. That, like, you know, you'd think you'd be able to just hold a gun up to him and be like, no, I don't want to do that, give me your money. But apparently he's got some sort of, like, genetic immunity to blasters. I thought that was absolutely hilarious. Obviously, he wouldn't need, like, you know, range damage reduction or anything like that, but just silly on how, to me, that just feels like, how would Hutts, you know, have survived and behaved like this? And that almost seems almost like retconny. Like, I can't imagine that was in his original design, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, how does he keep people from just shooting him?
But then, of course, there is that thing of, you know, obviously Luke tries to come in and mind control Jabba, and Jabba's like, your Jedi mind tricks won't work on me. And so there is obviously something else that's like, well, you know, the Hutts and you know, that they have like a resistance inbuilt, that they're just in control, which is why I really like them. But yeah, I feel like there's more for us to sort of mine out in terms of the lore and the background of that. But yeah, resistance, they got to manage it some way. You know, that seems like a good example of how
they're resistant to blasters and mind tricks, but not so much chains.
Oh,
Hey.
the choke. All right, so, I mean, we obviously want to know, when you're playing Destiny, are you favoring hero decks or villain decks, and why? Because each type of deck really functions in a very unique way mechanically, and I think that's amazing about Destiny. But, like, what's your playstyle? What's your deck choice?
Oh man, I'm so villains heavy. I mean, the thing is, I really do like a lot of the hero decks out there. You know, I've played a fair bit with, you know, the Carp Cannon, you know, Leia Akbar with Luke Bar. I quite like that fly fishing. Hang on, all these decks have got Akbar in. I like fly fishing. That deck that you guys did a whole sort of episode on. I think there's loads of hero decks that I really like, but for some reason, like I said, I love characters like Jabba, and I love the Sith. So, you know, I've always tended to lean, I think, towards, if I'm going to spend ages trying to build decks and put cool things together, as much as I love the mechanics of something like Destiny, I am probably more of a top-down sort of design, and happy that Destiny is like that. And so that probably what pulls me towards playing those villain characters, because when I win in Destiny, or even if I lose in Destiny, I kind of still want to be doing it in that way that I feel sort of fits me and that I really like. And, you know, I love the sort of the thought of, you know, Sith just dominating the battlefield, or Jabba getting his bounty hunters to, you know, kill people for him because he's crime lorded them. You know, I guess I love the mechanics, but the fact that it's the mechanics with the theme that marries to it just means I end up getting pulled more towards those villains, and probably will do most of the time.
Very cool. So with Spirit of Rebellion coming out in less than 2 weeks, we are about to have a gigantic shift in the meta, the decks that are being played, just the options that are available to people. And I would love to know, what are some of the things, some of the cards, maybe the decks, some of the mechanics, you know, what's coming out in Spirit of Rebellion that is making you really excited that, you know, in 2 weeks we're going to have so many new things to do. Like, what are you going to be shooting for first?
Oh, there's just so much, guys. I mean, I don't know if you've seen, but on the YouTube channel, I tend to use Tabletop Simulator a lot, and of course that's got all the cards on it. So I've actually been building decks. Man, I must have built 10 decks already and tested, and there's so many other sort of combinations and other potentials that I would dearly love to be doing and trying. And so I think probably the first and biggest thing that I'm most excited about with Spirit of Rebellion is just the fact that there are suddenly double the amount of characters. And, you know, if you're sort of working out all the ins and outs of how, you know, who can go with who, and all these potential teams that are out there, the fact those have all just sort of shot through the roof in terms of potentials, I feel like that's probably the thing that's just going to shake everything up the most, give us the most to play with. I almost feel like even, as a global community of people playing Destiny, it's going to take us so long to really properly test all these potential combinations of characters to find out what's good and just what isn't, what's strong, what's competitive, and all the rest. So I think that's probably number one. But of course, there's plenty of individual cards that I've been really excited about and excitedly playing with. So Unkar as a character, Unkar Plut, I mean, when I first saw his card, I was like, is this a misprint? With that +2 resource side on there. I mean, when you take him elite, that's 4 resources potentially off just 2 dice, which seems super strong. So of course, as soon as I saw that, I'm thinking, well, hang on a second, this is Crime Lord territory, surely, because that was a card that I absolutely fell in love with from the first set. It was one of the cards that got me really excited about Destiny and the potential that this game has when they could make a card like that. That could be an effect in the game. When Awakenings hits and Crime Lord is probably just a bit too slow and isn't really reliable enough to build a competitive deck, the fact that Unkar comes out in the next set and really turns it on, I think it's that he's the kind of character I get really excited about, that makes something that previously just was cool, was a great idea, but wasn't really there, to something that becomes really, oh man, this is a threat. When you're playing Destiny now in Spirit of Rebellion, you need to be aware that Crime Lord is really going to be a thing if you're up against Unkar and Jabba and those kind of characters. So I think Unkar as an individual card, as a character, is one of the ones that really stands out to me. I mean, there are so many, of course. I really love, there's a card called My Ally is the Force. So this is a blue hero card. It's an event, and it's got ambush, and it allows you to resolve one of your blue dice in the pool without removing it from the pool. And wow, I got wrecked with this. I mean, when I looked at it, I thought, hey, this is good, but I got wrecked with this. I played a game against, it was against a Qui-Gon Rey deck, who incidentally I think is going to be a bonkers deck with Spirit of Rebellion out now. And I'd rolled out my Vader and rolled strongly. I rolled a 3 and a 2 melee damage. So he then he's got a Ray with Force Throw on it. He plays Holdout Blaster, activates, and then with his remaining action, he then plays My Ally is the Force, because he's rolled the special on that Force Throw. And of course, what he then does is he uses the My Ally is the Force ability to throw the 3 Vader die back at Vader, and then with the ambush, he then resolves that Force Throw die and throws the 2 melee back into Vader. So not only does he do me 5, but I've just lost my ability to do 5 to him. And with this one play, this My Ally is the Force, that one card allowed him to swing. I'm 10 damage down from where I thought I would be prior to that card being played. And I feel like Spirit Rebellion's got a couple of other cards in it that they're like this. They create these massive swings. Planned Explosion is another example of a card that's like that. You're sort of looking at, he's got a bunch of dice out, he's not really doing anything, he's got a bunch of disrupts and discards. Planned Explosion, if you can show a value of 10 on your dice and you play Planned Explosion, if you can show 10 value on your dice, you can chuck out 10 damage. Again, that's massive. So one of the things I really like about this new set of cards is that we're seeing cards like that have these really, really cool big swings that I think will reward players who work hard to know the meta, to know the cards, to be able to see the potentials that are out there, will allow those players, to potentially rise to the top as the better players, the players who know the decks and know the meta. And that to me is a sign of a CCG that's starting to, is maturing, like really early and quickly. If you can build a game where players who know the game best and make the best decisions consistently are the ones who are tending to win, I think that's going to overcome a lot of what a lot of people are starting to moan about with Destiny, is that, hang on, it's a dice and a card game. How can you deal with all that variance? They know that. And I think that this new card pool is going to reflect that when you've got cards like this in it.
When you're talking about all these new cards and all these new things you're excited about, I want to focus on something that we've had comments before in the past. A lot of people have said, the supports in the game with Awakenings were a little lackluster. We've talked to, we've interviewed Zach, we've interviewed Lucas, we've talked to so many people, Jeremy Zorn, and the new supports coming out in this set are really strong. We're going to see a lot of very interesting cards, very powerful effects, and really strong costing. So what's your favorite support coming out with SOR, and how do you think that's going to change the way the game is played?
Well, I'm not so sure necessarily that my favourite support is actually going to be the strongest, if you like, or the most competitive. But I love Slave 1. I really love Slave 1. And who knows, maybe that it could be a really strong card in the upcoming meta. And there's a few reasons I love Slave 1. One is its cost. I think at 4, for what it's bringing to the table, is massive. I mean, it's got a lot of damage. It's doing 2, 3, and 4. And of course, it's got the special side, which is it's the one that reads, force an opponent to deal damage to their characters equal to the number of dice in their dice pool. Now, it is distributed as they wish. So it's a bit scattershot, that effect. But that could be 6, 7, 8 damage off a single die, which is bananas. Because, of course, Slave 1 just starts being a threat by its presence. Because they know that they're probably feeling like, oh no, he's got Slave 1 around. I need to be thinking about rolling my dice out and resolving them fairly quickly. Like, I can't just leave big bucket loads of dice out there. It means if you're trying to play out things like planned explosion and stuff like that, it becomes really problematic. So what I really love about Slave 1 is just by its presence, by its potential, its threat, if you like, it's going to make your opponents think twice and start playing differently, and that is a really powerful effect no matter what game you're playing, and it's really super powerful in Destiny. Now, the other thing, of course, about a 4 cost on Slave 1 is that it's coming in a faction, so this is it's villain, rogue villain, where you can make resources. I mean, I've talked about Unkar, we know Jabba, there's Underworld connections, there's so many ways of making money in yellow that a 4 for Slave 1, it just doesn't seem as expensive, I don't think, after having played quite a bit with SOR cards. 4 just doesn't feel as expensive as it was in Awakenings. I feel like there's the potential for certain decks to have a lot more resources available to them. And of course, if you've got decks that can create those resources, I think in Awakenings it felt quite hard for them to be able to dish out the beats, dish out the damage. Whereas if they can be buying supports like Slave 1 with 2s, 3s and 4s and that ridiculous special on it, they are going to be very easily able to start bringing lots more damage to the table, even though they're playing characters in a team that aren't necessarily, well, maybe even bringing any damage to the table. And that's almost where I come down to at the moment with supports and where they've got to. They feel a bit like playing another character out. I mean, if it's a die support, it's like having another character in your team. I mean, just think of any character that had a die like Slave 1. I mean, it'd be bonkers. But that's, in a sense, what you're bringing in. Now, of course, that does slow you down, and that's one of the big things with supports. You're going to take more activations to get stuff done, but then I think that just challenges us as deck builders to be more creative and come up with better ways to mitigate those kind of slower elements. Will these supports be, or going with decks that have quite a lot of support and become too slow with where the meta's going? Well, I think that's for us deck builders to work out. That's it's us listening to this. It's us sat at home thinking of cool ideas that are going to be the people who really determine, I think, where this goes. And maybe you guys can come back at me on this one, because what I feel with supports is, yes, of course, supports are going to make your deck slower. And we can't really get around that. And a lot of people are talking about the upcoming meta being a lot faster because of decks like Poe, Maz, or Luke Maz, Vader Raider with things like fast hands-on and all those kind of builds. So my question is, if you're not really, really fast, can you actually be super slow and almost the very opposite? Like the whole thing now is I know everyone else is trying to play really fast. Can I build a deck that just grinds, that just keeps alive and keeps these big fast decks? I'm still alive. They're working hard to finish. I'm still alive. I'm still alive. And almost that sort of classic Control thing of by the end of the game, they've almost used themselves up. And actually now you've got 3, 4 supports in place. I mean, do you feel like that's a possibility in the upcoming meta, or is that pie in the sky?
I don't know about, like 4 supports or like a whole ton of supports, because it is a lot of effort to sort of air quotes get them online. But the thing about like these heavier supports like Slave One or the other I think star of the show from SOR, as far as the heavies goes, U-Wing is a destroyer of worlds if that thing gets online, with its ability to pepper your team with shields or its like insane amount of damage sides, and it can't miss. Unfortunately, Slave One can miss. What I think is that depending on if and when you can get a support online, supports do one thing that's kind of interesting in that they almost always demand a response where, they can be potentially dangerous to the point where you would want to run your heavy removal or your answers. Otherwise, if said support can get online enough times, it is like another character. It is, they don't get upgrades, but when Slave One's reliably swinging for 3 and 4 damage, or gets off that crazy special, it's almost like a character getting to use upgrades and so forth. So good supports eat removal and demand response. The question is, do they care enough to respond to it, or do they just keep chewing through your characters? Because the tragedy of supports are, it doesn't matter how many supports you have, when your characters are dead, the game's over. But another support I want to mention, though, that I think is the one that probably should be turning heads if not already, and that's C-3PO. That guy is he's out of control.
He's so good.
Speaking of fly fishing, like I've been playing Michael, he's the guy who made the fly fishing deck. He's in my local meta, and he slotted in C-3PO into his deck, and that deck just got infinitely more terrifying, because that die just turns any die into a focus, which then you flip one of his Akbars, and then it just cascades into money, damage, shields, discard. Like, I could never end a turn with cards in my hand if I didn't already deal with the C-3PO die. And the frustrating thing about the C-3PO die is, like, it doesn't matter what it rolls, just by it existing, I had to, like, just either, remove it or try to kill who he's going to buff. But on top of Michael's incredibly, ready for anything defensive suite, like that deck, fly fishing and what it's become, and granted he still has work to do, he doesn't have all the SOR cards he wants to add to it yet, but when he does, I'm sure he'll update his list. But that's a slow deck. I mean, Michael plays, as we joke in our group, he plays painfully slow, which is a play style. It's no insult to him. He relishes in the fact. But I mean, we haven't thrown new shiny like fully geared out decks at him. So his deck, kind of has the tools while we don't. So I can't comment, like, is this deck still going to be a terror? But just how much adding C-3PO has caused me frustration and pause. I mean, granted, I know I'm going to be running Sabotage. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but even strictly just dealing with C-3PO and, of course, some of the other new scary supports like, Imperial Inspection and things like that. Like, I think supports are going to be interesting enough that cards like Sabotage and Surgical Strike are actually going to become possibly staple cards in decks. Because, again, like, I just think C-3PO alone is going to change the face of hero decks right now.
Yeah, I haven't put a yellow deck together that hasn't had Sabotage in, and yeah, you don't always need to use it, but sometimes you really do. And I feel like in the upcoming meta, it's those kind of cards are going to be the essential to have in, because looking at this menu of supports that we've got coming up, I I can't fathom a meta that doesn't have some strong builds with supports in, because you're right, things like Imperial Inspection at 0 cost is so good. I mean, I even mentioned supports like Dark Presence, which is the similar to Imperial Inspection one, but it's when you roll a discard side, you can remove dice. You can remove a die per Dark Presence that you've got out, and when you've got decks like mill decks, which I think is that's a whole archetype that really is, as a control sort of type deck, is really going to be potentially competitive in the new meta. And of course, what's difficult for mill to do is to keep alive. Well, if you've got, when you mill, you keep your characters alive by making your opponent remove dice. I mean, it's just amazing. And the one last one I have to mention that I think is fun, but is going to be bonkers, and that's Command Shuttle with new Baby Vader. I mean, that's a lot of chance to start throwing out 3 damage, and of course that Command Shuttle, it's got 2 specials on, and with all the focus that you can play in blue, I think you can almost use somebody like a Baby Vader to just really burn down his special ability. Of course, reads deal 3 damage and deal 1 damage to Vader. And if you've got that Command Shuttle available, to be able to potentially be dishing out those 3s, and of course it's got damage on itself anyway, really, really strong, I think. So there's just so much. There's so many good supports upcoming.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny that you bring up C-3PO there, and I've been looking at him thinking that he may just be too slow. What Christian was kind of alluding to there, having to pay 1 for C-3PO, roll out his die, have other dice out there for you to resolve his action with, and then only being able to do one of your dice as that symbol. It just feels like it might be too slow, but seeing that your friends had a little bit of success with it brings me a little bit of new hope to the sports coming out.
Yeah, and to sort of jump on top of that, recently I've been playtesting with my friends who are going to Worlds to compete and passing around different decks and doing the gauntlet of sorts. And even now, I've been playing Han Rey decks, Rey Poe decks, and Qui-Gon Rey decks to help my friends test against everything. And there are times where you use your holdout blasters or you use Infamous, and you chain 3-4 actions in a row, and then you end up just spending them on rerolls because you actually didn't do anything. Everything you rolled was insufficient, or the pieces didn't fit together, and so that 1 bonus action, or even sometimes that 2 bonus action, only gave you the flexibility to possibly resolve 1 or 2 of your dice or try to fix them, but then you're on the same tempo as you were before. You just got an extra action to maybe discard something to try and set up again. I mean, again, there's going to be hot streaks. There's going to be Rays that, destroy the world. She already does it now when you're rolling well with Poe and you're rolling well with, everyone else that you sticker with. And Maz makes some pretty scary, reliable chains as well. But you gotta remember that just because there's potential doesn't mean it's always going to happen. And I mean, your opponent could just reliably roll right the first time, and you just have to spend all your actions, trying to play Doctor on Rey's phenomenally not great dice. They're a lot better now that we have Vibroknife. They're a lot better now that there's more things to synergize with her, obviously. But it's not... One of the things is, if they're spending, the first couple actions to get these sort of speed setups, so to speak, those are actions, those are cards, and there are things that they aren't able to use as many, that's a card from their hand, so then they may not have the upgrade to follow or things like that. Or if they do, they have less defensive options, so then they're not messing with what you're doing on the first couple turns. So therefore, you have more freedom to press advantage or, beat Rey up or all those sorts of things where even though maybe they got the setup, it it doesn't happen first turn, or at least not enough to slow you down, or without giving you an opportunity to set up or come up with a plan based on, okay, did they get 4 speed? Okay, they did. Well, then now I'm just gonna definitely beat the crud out of Ray, as opposed to like maybe they don't draw it or things like that. You just have to remember, like, the game is potentially faster, but will it lead to favorable results all the time? No. And those cards take up slots, those cards take up actions, and you can roll not a special on 4 speed. Okay, cool, good job, proud of you.
Right. You obviously asked one of the most important questions about Destiny, and that's how do you play in a meta that looks like it's forcing players to be extremely fast? And I think that's a very unique perspective, is you look at the cards that are popular, you look at the way the game is kind of going towards, and it would appear that it's super fast. But when I was at Celebration, I saw a lot of people who had either fast hands or they had force speed, and they would resolve these actions really quickly, but they would be done after, say, 2 or 3 actions, and they're just sitting there, and they would traditionally claim, or they would just pass over and over, and it put them in a really terrible position, because if you've got the battlefield, you could pass and go first again. If you know that they're just not doing anything and they just want to see you roll out, you can basically play that way and not really fear about much removal. And if they do remove your stuff, they're just doing it because there's nothing else for them to do, and so you can bait out removal early game, where they might need to use that removal at a later point for a more impactful play. So being able to go through your entire turn super fast is not very beneficial in a game that's built to be reactive in you take an action, I take an action, you take an action, I take an action. And you guys know I play weird decks. I like to do strange things. I actually like having decks that are slower purposefully, so the opponent just blows their entire turn, passes, and then I have free reign to change my dice. I can pull out combos, I can do shenanigans. And another thing I think that's going to come into a big play with Spirit of Rebellion is the battlefields. We're seeing a lot of these battlefields that have really good effects that may or may not actually be dangerous for you. So one of the cards I'm really excited to play with my Jabba Uncard deck is Moisture Farm, which says claim, gain a resource. I actually want my opponent to get resources, because then I have targets to eat, and then I can utilize my salvage stand, I can use my kind of scum, I can use cards and dice to eat their resources, and they might think, oh, hey, I got a resource, but really it's a very disingenuous play, because I'm actually setting them up to steal their money from them and turn that into economy for my deck. So it's not going to necessarily be the best thing to do, and you're really going to have to look at how the meta forms and what decks are being played. But I definitely think having slower decks can very genuinely be a benefit to certain types of decks. Your control decks, some of your crime lord decks, you kind of want your opponent to blow through their turn and claim, so then you can make your money, make your crime lord go off, and you're not really afraid of removal happening. So it does depend on the way you build a deck, but I think strong players and people who are looking for a unique experience can utilize slow decks in ways that people aren't really going to expect.
And I think you're spot on there, Sugi. I mean, one of the decks that I built recently that was quite popular is Shooting Sisters, where the whole idea of that really was to just stay alive, almost stall out for the turn, use Night Sister's ability to keep making them do rerolls, and then once they've used themselves up, you would then go, when you turn those Night Sisters to their damage, using Jabba and his focus. And so essentially the whole idea was, let them play their turn, and then it's your let them play their round, and then it's your go, and they can't do a lot about it. I think maybe the difficulty that I'm seeing coming up with Spirit of Rebellion is, I mean, you said there about it's no good players doing nothing really fast. I mean, if they got 4 speeds going off and fast hands, or lots of multiple actions from Rays and things like that, well, that's all fine and dandy. But if all they end up doing is rolling dice and then re-rolling them, well, of course, that's rubbish. But if they can be fast and consistent in achieving their strategy of their deck, well, that's when it gets a bit terrifying. And one of the decks that I've been playing with recently, I'm not much of an aggro player really, but I built a Vader, as in Vader from Awakenings, Royal Guard pairing, Elite Vader, single Royal Guard, and that is consistently killing characters on round 2, really consistently, because there's so much damage out of hand with force strikes and with lightsaber throws and with now you will die, which turns Vader's 2 disrupt side into 2 damage. So when you've got deck builds that you can make that can go fast, because of course you can watch the games on the YouTube channel. Vader with force speed on, if he rolls those force speed specials, you're not wasting cards on re-rolling. You're just going, I'll force strike, and then I'll lightsaber throw, and then I'll deal that 4 damage off. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, that was 10 damage, and that is a dead ray. That was really fast. It was really fast, and it was really consistently doing what the deck wanted to do. And I think that's potentially where Spirit of Rebellion is going to be a really fast meta, because if you've got players who are able to deck build that goes fast and dishes its damage consistently, well, that's terrifying. That's why Poe Maz is really good, because it's really hard for Poe to not end up dealing loads of damage once he's activated. So I think that going fast and doing nothing, rubbish. Going fast and achieving lots is the challenge of the deck builders, and I think Spirit Rebellion has given deck builders the tools, given all of us the tools to make decks that can do that.
Well, personally, I'm hoping cards that can help respond to that are like, I really love the card Friends in Low Places, and I really liked Probe in set 1. I think Probe struggled, but like holistically, it was a neat card that when it hit, it felt fantastic, but obviously when it didn't, it was super frustrating. But now, we have a free, I look at your hand and then I take out your like smallest event, so you can finally like deal with those force strikes, deal with those deflects, deal with a whole plethora of really nasty flash. Even just, trading that for a electroshock or a flank can sometimes make all the difference for the round. And I know what you're doing for the turn, so I know, like, crud, I have to play around, the ability that you have, lightsaber throw or something. So I do think there are some tools that exist to sort of help you, combat against this. Another card that I think should get special mention and granted, and keep in mind, Friends in Low Places can be an aggro card too. I mean, knowing like how aggressive you can play in that turn to see what kind of ways they can mess you up. It goes both ways. But a really fantastic card of the set that's super interesting to me is Cheat. Cheat is a 1-cost yellow neutral event that allows you to discard a card. It says swap. Swap a card from your hand with a card in your discard pile, allowing you to, reuse certain effects that you want to get again. You could get it just as an easy example, like another lightsaber throw or another Friends in Low Places. Probably not the best trade, but I'm just saying, like, you can grab anything. Like, so you can use something as a discard to get a reroll and then get it back, or knowing that you have Cheat in your deck. One thing that I like about Cheat is it allows one-ofs to be fantastically more flexible, where you can possibly run a bit more of a toolbox list, have one-ofs, and then if you ended up wanting another one, Cheat can substitute as any card in your deck, creating scenarios where 2-ofs are good. You could get another block or dodge if you like running those cards. I mean, again, it's anything. You can get any weapon back that got disarmed. You can repair your C-3PO that I've sabotaged, because I'm going to do that. And Cheat just opens, to me, like, a whole lot of very interesting doors. It adds a lot of new, again, consistency to the game, and I find Cheat to be like just again like the ultimate toolbox card that players who enjoy yellow, now I can like I ran 2 Armed to the Teeth in my Bala deck because I wanted to make sure that's like early on in the game I sort of had the air quotes eject button to be able to throw all my gear at you, but drawing 2 of it was awful. But now, ideally, I could potentially just run one and cheat, and hopefully the one feeds into the other. Obviously, having cheat first and not the target you want to recur doesn't do anything for you. So it's not a perfect answer. It's not an exact copy of every card, but again, it can allow you to feel better about discarding certain options early. You know, if you really want to go for a reroll in an early turn and then be able to get that back and make some different interesting plays. So I think cheat opens up a lot of doors, although it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting talking about that card and just saying like, yeah, and then on turn 2 I cheated and blah blah blah. So that will never not be funny.
I cheated to win the game. Can you please elaborate on that?
I cheat every single game.
It's funny though that, you know, we had a card similar to that in Awakenings and Return of the Jedi that didn't see a whole lot of play, but just the fact that, you know, you can get anything back with cheat just ups the value of it so much higher. Just like you were saying, with using it as a toolbox or using it to get back the direct damage events in yellow that we have already. It's gonna be a great card, and everybody's gonna be cheating now.
Yeah. I mean, I would mention. I mean, I stuck it in the Uncard Jabba build that I used, that cheat, and of course it makes anything that you do ace in the hole on, where you have to discard it. I mean, doing ace in the hole on your Crime Lord in Awakenings was pretty scary, because that meant you only had one left, or you're only going to have two in the deck, whereas suddenly being able to do that turn 1 ace in the hole Crime Lord or some other similar sort of ballsy type play with a card like cheat in the pool, suddenly it means like you can be so much more confident about playing that and it not hamstringing you for the rest of the game. And so having cards like that in, I think almost FFG, they print one card and suddenly they make 2, 3, 4 whatever number of those more combo-y decks suddenly be, oh, this is feasible, like this is possible, we can do this, and it might not really suck.
I love how the game is working in such a flexible manner, because we're all excited about these new cards. We're excited about, cheat. We're excited about what it brings to the table, what you can do. I'm really excited more about how the game is really raising the skill ceiling. You were talking, Christian, about, these really fast decks that you can do all these actions and you can play all these cards and just do all this damage. And in the back of my head, like, I'm constantly coming up with ideas on how to stop that. And, I'm more of a control and economy player. And so the first thing that comes to mind is, how can I remove your resources before you can roll your dice? Because if I shut out your economy, everything you just talked about is pretty much offline. Because if you have no money, you can't play those cards, which means you can't resolve those dice with special effects, and you can't hurt me. So the very first thing is Salvage Stand. That card is amazing. I mean, everyone I played, as soon as I dropped that, and I would always mulligan as hard as I could to get that out turn 1. Anyone who played against me, their face just dropped because they know exactly what I'm doing. Pomaz, if you can turn off their resources with that card, or even just a fat disrupt, that deck is shut down so slow, because they have to spend money to play the cards they need, and they have to spend money to resolve the massive damage. If you eat all the money from Pomaz, you go from 6 potential damage to 4. 2 damage is a really big swing. Then if they only have 1 resource, sure, they could deal 5 with a 3-for-1 and a 2, but they can't play anything. That means they're rolling no extra dice. They're not doing any kind of removal. They're not getting any upgrades. And you, on the other hand, might take 5 damage to the face, but you're still going to have enough money to play your removal, your effects, and your upgrades with dice. And taking some damage early on is not a big deal if you can get your field set up. And just the fact that there are threats and there are very powerful combinations, but there's also counters and there's answers to all of these things you're talking about. And that's really exciting to me. So I find that even though the game is inherently working and looking at fast returns, there's still ways to counter that. And so people who play control decks, people who play mill, combo, or even slower decks, we still have an answer. It's not just flat out, you have to play fast decks. If you don't play fast deck, you lose the game. You're not going to have any fun. Game's over. No, there's counters, there's ways to slow it down, but it challenges the player to find those answers and to construct decks that have outs to these situations, and to honestly respect the fact that these cards and these combos exist, and you have to know what they are, when they can fire off, and how to slow them down. And that's just good for players because it forces everyone to grow in understanding the game and to become better players. And I think that's great. I think a lot of people are going to have a wonderful time experiencing, building these decks and playing them, or having them played against them. And then your brain goes into this mode where you're like, how do I stop that? What do I do to keep myself alive? Is there a card that can, mitigate some of this damage? And then you're going back into the card pool and you're theory crafting, and you're deck constructing, and then you go back to your buddies and you're playing more games, and then you have more discussions, and it just builds this really strong community because the game has options, but the players are going to find really unique and interesting ways to play those options out onto the tabletop.
And kind of building off of that, every game that I've ever played, every card game I've ever played, when a new meta hits, it almost always runs out with fast aggro decks being the choice, and everybody thinking that, how do you beat this fast aggro deck? And then after a while, people figure out how it's beaten, and then it moves back to a more, averaged out between control, mid-range, and aggro. I mean, if you think at Awakenings, when Destiny first came out, the big bad deck on the field was Django Veers. Now, where is Django Veers now? Nobody ever talks about it. Nobody sees it doing well in tournaments anymore. Hardly anybody is playing it now. But, that used to be what everybody was fearing. The most feared deck in the tournaments right now, or back then, was Django Veers. We figured out how to fight Django Veers. Now nobody plays it anymore because it's a little inconsistent. So we'll see. I think we'll see that again with Spirit of the Rebellion. Yes, we see a lot of things that people are speed is going to be what everybody goes to in the beginning, but there's ways to fight it, like Sugi was saying. And, just looking at fast hands, yes, it's great when you have that one dice that you really want to get off and you don't want them to utilize it. But again, it's just one die, and you're not going to be able to build large range damage chains with the modified sides like we're used to right now, or what's going to be the one that gets the real big damage in at one time. You're only going to be able to get, a max of 4 possibly damage out. Maybe, getting a Poe special that can get somewhere up to 5 or 6. But it's not always going to be the roll out fast hands, you take 5. Okay, let's go to the next round. Roll out fast hands, you take 5. You see, kind of things like that I'm looking at there. I'm not a big fan of fast hands because it kind of takes up a spot on your upgrades and then forces you to resolve one die where you can be possibly building higher chains and making those modified damage deal more damage.
A big thing, we've talked about it, but I like to bring this up. I saw it firsthand at Celebration. When you're playing these cards, they don't lend themselves to extra damage. Fast Hands inherently deals no extra damage. Force Speed does not have any damage on its die faces. So you're turning these utility cards into speed. That's great. But you have to realize that if you roll poorly, you have utility that does nothing. So there were tons of times I saw Fast Hands on Poe, and if he rolls blanks, nothing happens. If he rolls 3-for-1s but has no money, nothing happens. If he rolls anything that's not damage, your opponent doesn't have to resolve it. And so generally with Fast Hands, you want the resolution to be damage. Traditionally, I've seen a lot of turns where players will use Fast Hands and they just take what they can get, which means you rolled out and you got maybe a shield or a resource, but you really wanted the damage. A big thing about Fast Hands, it says after you activate attached character, you may resolve one of its character upgrade dice. Rerolls don't count. And if you think, oh, I can reroll and use Fast Hands, nope, you have to hard resolve that die. You don't get to cheat. So essentially Fast Hands is a one and done. If you roll out your Poe with Fast Hands on him and you just don't get those sides you need, you can choose to resolve the die, but you probably won't because you want to reroll to get damage. And so now you have a card that's not doing anything. So it's good in the right points in time when it needs to be good, but it's not a 100% guarantee. I'm just going to get all this damage. I'm going to do all these things before you can stop me. That is not the case. And I'm telling you, I've also seen players roll out Poe, then they roll out Maz, and they're not resolving anything with Fast Hands, and they're not resolving anything with Maz's special because they don't need resources and shields. They need damage. And so now they're stuck with cards that don't do anything, effects that don't do anything, and they have to pitch cards to reroll. So I don't think that Fast Hands and Force Speed are going to just destroy the meta and be these awful things because, like I said earlier, I've seen people use Force Speed and their two actions are reroll because they just didn't get anything. Or they have so many actions because they played an ambush card on Ray and then they got force speed and then they turn into rolling, resolving, and passing or claiming. And that's great. That's perfect. You didn't see a lot of terrible things happen. And more often than not, on average, these cards are not going to just be, 6 damage every single turn. You're just going to see a burst, maybe one in every 3 or 4 turns where it's really devastating. But overall, they're not threatening in the grand scope of a single game.
Yeah, I mean, I like so much of what you're saying. I mean, my heart is with like slow control, the choke type decks, the mills, I just love that kind of play, and I guess I kind of hope that that's where what I'd love for it to be is a varied enough meta where the fast decks can win fast occasionally and the slow decks can win slowly occasionally, and that there is a good balance in it. I mean, early testing I don't think necessarily is leaning me in my experience towards that, because again I think you're right. There are of course those turns when even the Pomazes or the whatever decks, they roll and they spend all of their fastness re-rolling. But I guess in my experience as well, there's plenty of times, and this is the challenge when you're deck building. Can I be building a deck that even if it doesn't, with it all of its speed, roll exactly what I want, can I still be consistent in putting out the damage? I mean, it's a really nice point that, of course, force speed, if it doesn't roll its special, well, it's not going to do a lot. And even if you just roll the shield on it, or, hey, you're not really going to be able to change it to something else that's really impactful very quickly. So, hey, that means you're like, well, why don't I run all in then? As a deck builder, I think, yeah, I'm not always going to hit my 50% chance of hitting the special and the 2 actions, but it does have a focus on there. Well, actually, I'm also playing Sith Holocron in this deck. That's got a focus on. Okay, yeah, all in suddenly becomes a brilliant card to put in here, because what I'm doing there is, let's say I don't hit my strategy of, right, when I play 4 speed, I want to hit those specials. So what else could I roll that might mess up my strategy? Well, hey, all in's just going to be a solid card, because that's going to help me deal my damage faster if I can roll that focus. So absolutely, you're absolutely right in what you're saying, Sugi, and I think the challenge then becomes to the people who are, to all of us who are trying to put our decks together, can we still, even when we don't roll all the speed at the right time when we want it, build a consistent enough deck? And I guess only that's only going to come out in play, and this would be a great conversation to have in, say, 2 months' time or 3 months' time, when the new set's about to hit, and we're all feeling like, yeah, this meta was really fast, or this meta was really slow, or hopefully it was really balanced, which is, I think, where we all want it.
Going back to the original question many, many, many minutes ago, we're talking about supports, and there are a lot of supports in this set that are 0 cost and 1 cost. And in terms of like mid-range combo decks, they're all about setup. We've talked about Salvage Stand. That one, says if you roll a die showing a resource symbol, you can exhaust that card to force an opponent to lose one of their resources. There's another one we've talked about before, Dark Presence. Basically, same thing. If you roll a die showing a discard symbol, you can exhaust the support to force an opponent to choose and remove one of their dice. There's, Imperial Inspection. There's so many of these setup cards that allow you to do things on roll. You don't actually have to, cast a card out of your hand. And I really think that when we're talking about these speedy decks versus these slow or slower decks, even with just 1 or 2 of these supports on the field, you're still a threat. And another thing we've seen is the removal cards that have come out of Spirit of Rebellion have a lot of removal effects that don't force you to sacrifice a die. So, for example, we saw Electroshock. You pay $1, you get to remove a die that costs 2 or less. But then we also saw a lot of cards like Negotiate, He Doesn't Like You, where, you sacrifice a die, you get rid of 1 of theirs. You sacrifice a die, you get rid of 2 of theirs. A lot of removal effects in Awakenings where you sacrifice a die and then you get rid of someone else's die. These new removal cards are now not as focused focused on you having dice out on the field. 1/4 portion is a perfect example. Villain yellow, hey, pay $1, remove an opponent's die, then an opponent gains a resource. Cool. If someone rolled 3 damage and was going to kill you, you don't have the speed to play He Doesn't Like You. But you have $1 and you can play 1/4 portion. Totally works. You know, the weaker versions of dodge and block, you've got evade and parry. You just pay $1 and you get rid of a single melee or a single range damage die. There's so many ways to remove dice on the field now without having to have yours out in the pool. And I think that's going to change the way games are played, because at this point, we're so used to seeing, hey, if it's more than 2 cost, so if you've got a die with 3 or higher and your opponent doesn't have a die on the field, the only real option you could potentially see would either be a block, a dodge, or a flank. And so if you've got more guys available than they have, exhausted, flank's not online. And if they don't have 2 resources, dodge and block are not online. So you can mathematically determine if a card can be removed or not pretty efficiently. Now with Spirit of Rebellion, a lot of that goes out the window, because you can have parry, you can have 1/4 portion, you can have options that will force your opponent to be very smart. They can't just math their way out of, okay, they don't have resources, they don't have exhausted characters, so there's only 1 or 2 options they could potentially have, but those are out of color, so they can't play them. And I think that's going back to, that question you were saying, like, yeah, can you be a slow deck and win? Very possibly. Very, very possibly. And that is a really brilliant question to ask in a couple months. Are we fast decks only? Are we mid-range? Are we slow? Where's the meta? And I'm excited to see where it goes. But I definitely think there are so many things that are in the new set that allow decks to be very scary without having any dice in their pool. And even rolling dice can still be very reactive and dangerous. And that's going to make players have to pay much more attention to what colors are they playing? What options could they potentially have? Is this a die that could be removed? Is this something I need to resolve faster than normal? Because in Awakenings, you could sit on it. You could roll a die. You could sit on it for an action or 2 and not be too worried about it if you knew what your opponent was running. Now, that's not as much the case anymore. And I think that's very exciting, because the decisions you make will definitely lead you to a very good victory or a very interesting defeat, because you're going to have to be aware of so many different things happening as games progress. All right, so as we wrap up the show, we always like to ask our guests, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, definitely. Because we've got this whole new raft of cards coming out, everyone's going to be super excited. I think there's going to be another big clamouring around Destiny. Loads of people who haven't played it for the last couple of months are now going to want to come back to it. So there's, I think, going to be a few of us who are thinking about how to either start or sort of build up, or either further establish maybe their local scene, their local Destiny scene. So I just wondered if you guys got any quick little tidbits of information or cool ideas that you can think of that could help people to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this problem actually with Netrunner way back in the day. Nobody knew what it was. And so the very first thing I did was I talked to my local game shop, and I got to talk to the owner, and I said, can we do some kind of demo day? And they're like, yeah, sure, totally. And so the first thing I can definitely recommend to people is talk to your local game store and set up some kind of event that's free. I wouldn't have any kind of money interaction, because, people don't necessarily want to pay to play a game. I know with Destiny, you're probably going to have to pay for a product. So, if they've got some starter decks maybe that they've already opened that you can use as demo kits or something like that, that might be a good way to start. But the easiest thing to do is talk to a local game store, ask them if you can start an event, start, broadcasting as much as you can, use Facebook, talk to your friends, have posters, or even talk to the owner and say, can you mention to people that, this event is happening, say at your, Friday Night Magic event, or, if you run Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh or a board game night, can you promote that, hey, on such and such day at this time, we're going to have a Destiny demo day, and we'd love to invite anyone to come and play. And most of the time they're more than happy to not only spread the word, but help you grow the community, because they want to see more people play the game. Use resources. We've got a Discord channel, there's a really big Facebook group, Star Wars Destiny. There's almost 8,000 people in there. You can go on Facebook and say, hey, I'm doing this event. Go on Reddit. Hey, I'm doing this event. Does anyone want to help? Is anyone interested? And you can garner support and interest using social media that way too. And really it doesn't cost you anything. It's just going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of discussion, but that's the easiest and most effective way to start a community is just talking to people and stirring up some interest.
Something else you can do is try to bring 1 or 2 extra decks, possibly made out of your spares or starters or whatever, but always have a deck on hand that if someone comes over and is like, oh, hey, this looks interesting, you can just go, hey, use this, and then obviously be there and available to help them see or learn the game. But I mean, like, in situations where you have a ton of spares sitting around, like, there's no reason to not have something ideally a little less than a competitive deck. In terms of, like, like, you can hand somebody, like, an aggro deck and usually they can get the idea and they can make fun turns and do cool stuff. But I'm more saying, like, don't give them, like, a complicated deck, ideally. Some people don't find Destiny to be as grokky as other games, but I think with the introduction of Spirit of Rebellion, it's definitely going to up the complexity level. It already has. There's so many questions on Facebook and all the forums and everywhere. But my point is it's really easy to just have a simple deck with you, not necessarily a starter. Starter works too, but I'm thinking more of a full deck that if someone sits down and says, like, I want to try this, instead of handing them, your competitive list or whatever, you can hand them just something fun that they can sink their teeth into and just try it out in the moment. And so for people who have, spare stuff, consider doing that and just sort of have a, another option at the ready, so to speak. I think does really well, and it's just something I've done in other games where I just had a silly fun deck that just, like, you don't have to look at cards and go, what does this do, too often, and it just sort of speaks to what makes the game fun.
Yeah, to piggyback a little bit off of what Jay was saying and bringing the other decks, they kind of put that into the pre-release for Spirit of Rebellion. One of the little objectives to get the promos was have a second deck, and that goes a long way into being able to show people that are interested when they come by and see you playing, just say, hey, you want to sit down, you want to play, even if you don't have an extra deck, let them use yours against your buddy and kind of walk them through the initial turns and then set them loose. Again, you don't want to have them play against some of those negative play experience decks that are out there right now, but make sure that they're having fun and keeping it simple with it, because there's really nothing more fun than rolling damage and throwing it at your opponent's face, and they will definitely enjoy that. And then maybe go pick up a starter and show them what to look for and where to get the product and things like that. Hopefully with Spirit of Rebellion, some of those supply issues will be cleared up a bit. Let them know that in June you got a whole nother wave of awakenings coming back around, so that they're not coming in at maybe miss the train on awakenings, so to speak, that they do have a chance to get back into some of those good cards from there.
Yeah, it's really, really easy to get your community up and running. It does take a little bit of time, it does take a little bit of effort, but it's not impossible, and it really doesn't cost anything out of pocket unless you buy maybe a starter deck or two just to kind of get players to teach. But like I said before, if you talk to your local game store, they're usually more than willing to either crack a deck open for a demo copy or perhaps give you a little bit of a discount so that you can purchase some decks that you can let people play with. Either way, just talk to your local game store and they will be so beneficial in helping not only grow your community, but giving you and your community access to Destiny events, Destiny games, and the Q1, Q2 kits, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely check it out and use all of the internet resources that are available, and you'll be up and running in no time. So as we wrap the show up, thank you so much once again to Christian for joining us. And why don't you, let people know, where can they find you? What do you have any secret stuff coming out? You've done a lot of deck tech videos. Is there any kind of special stuff you've got on deck?
Yeah, well, if you want to catch up with anything that I'm doing, it's all on Severn Gaming Network on the YouTube channel. I mean, we've got a Patreon set up, and that's fairly new, and that's just really starting to build, and more people getting involved in that. And so, of course, that sort of creates its own little community, and people that you can sort of further more closely invest in with your patrons. So it's a really great system that those guys have set up with Patreon. It's really great, and you guys, of course, have a great setup with that too. So those are probably the two main ways. And in terms of stuff that's coming up, well, obviously once Spirit of Rebellion more properly hits, I think there's just a lot more exploring to do of this meta. I'm going to keep cranking out deck techs because they're just so much fun. I love building decks and testing them out. And probably a good example of the kind of stuff that's upcoming is my very latest series, which is essentially taking a deck and building it from scratch and just going through the process that I use. And I love doing stuff like that, and just opening it up. And if people are finding it helpful, people are learning from it, and they're enjoying Destiny more because of that content, well, that's what gets me sort of excited. That's what gets me stoked about it. So people can expect definitely more of that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Once again, check out Christian and Severn Gaming Network. We've got him linked in the show notes. Check out all of the really, really cool stuff he's got out on YouTube. And as we're wrapping up the show, we just would like to say a couple things. Once again, as always, big thank you to all of our Patreons. We are going to be at Worlds in just a few short weeks, and we couldn't have done it without you. So we are very proud to announce that we're going to be doing some exclusive content just for Patreons. We're going to have some interviews and some exclusive stuff that only Patreons are going to be able to access only on the Patreon channel. And we're going to announce a little bit more about that as we get closer to Worlds. But thank you so very much for helping us get all the coverage from Celebration and Worlds. We couldn't have done this without you. So thank you so very much. We are running a promotion right now with Fully Operational. And if you haven't heard about this, they have some really cool t-shirts. We've posted pictures on our Facebook and Twitter pages, and right now they're going to be doing these exclusively for Worlds. So you can order them and pick them up at Worlds for free, or you can order them and have them shipped to your house. And if you use the code KNIGHTS10, that's KNIGHTS 10 in all caps, 10 for the digits, you can get 10% off of your order. You'll find more information on our Facebook page and in the show notes, but there are some really cool shirts you definitely don't want to miss. And we are really excited to announce that they're going to be at Worlds and donating a couple shirts to give away at our happy hour, which we are really excited about. We're going to be hanging out at one of the bars right down the street from FFG on Friday night. So if you're listening to this and you live in the area, if you're playing at Worlds, if you're not playing at Worlds, if you just want to come hang out, totally come on down. We'll talk about Destiny, we'll play some games, we'll eat some food, have some drinks, and give out some free swag. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. Big shout out to Christian and the Severn Gaming Network. We cannot wait to meet everyone at Worlds, and thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week, and may the Force be with you.
The Force. It's calling to you.